Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation here on the Tattooed Historians Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Thank you so much for being patient. We had some technical difficulties, and so I pushed the start time to 7:15. So glad that many of you stuck around for tonight's discussion. And tonight I have my friend Jonathan Noyalas from Shenandoah University, director of the McCormick Civil War Institute. Jonathan, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm so glad to have you back on. Some people may remember you from a previous live stream we did on a panel on winter encampments and Civil War soldiers, and you were on a podcast as well. So this is a three-peat for you.
Yeah. I'm glad to be back.
Thank you as well for sending me a good cause, letters from the 9th New York Heavy Artillery, which we're going to go over here in a little while. I've seen many of your publications and articles and stuff over the years, and I've also seen it underscoring the McCormick Civil War Institute at Shenandoah University. And I would love, Jonathan, to start off by asking you about your previous experience with education and then the McCormick Civil War Institute.
Yeah, sure. So, being the director of the McCormick Civil War Institute is kind of my dream job. Because I did my undergraduate work at Shenandoah University and then did my graduate work at Virginia Tech. And then I worked for 13 years in the community college system in Virginia at Lord Fairfax Community College. And when I was offered the opportunity to come to SU back in January 2017, I jumped at the opportunity because the McCormick Civil War Institute it's something that, when I was a student at SU, it was largely a class in Civil War history. There were a couple of tours and programs throughout the year. Mm-hmm. And when I came, I really wanted to kind of expand it. So we do all that kind of stuff. We offer an undergraduate certificate in Civil War studies. We do a whole host of programs and tours throughout the year, some online, some in the field. We do conferences, and I know we're going to talk about the spring conference. We, have a journal that we publish annually, the Journal of the Shenandoah Valley during the Civil War era. So we just celebrated, 5 years of publication of that. And we also have created a series of primary documents. So we have a growing collection of letters and diaries from Civil War soldiers in our collections that have been donated to us. And so when people donate these things, I don't like to just sit on them and put them away in a dusty archival box somewhere. I want to make these available to the public. And so, you've held up a good cause there, and that's our second book publication in about 2 years. And it's again, I think a pretty rich collection of letters. Mm-hmm. And so, and the great thing about everything that we do, whether it's, conferences, programs, tours, publications, whether it's working out at our Cool Spring Battlefield site in Clark County, everything that we do is done with the help of our students. So our students at SU are not only getting, regular traditional kind of experiences in the classroom, but a lot of hands-on real world experience in the field and working on publications and some other pretty cool and interesting product. We do a lot with, augmented reality and virtual reality and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, those are two things I really admired about the program. Was when I first met you and we talked about McCormick, it was you get the students published early, because when you get out there in the quote real world, people are like, well, what do you have publication wise? What do you have as a historian or as a public historian? They want to know that. And secondly was how you're bridging that divide between electronic media and the historical narrative in new and dynamic ways. And speak about that just for a second, Jonathan, before we go into the conference, about that augmented reality project on the Cool Spring Battlefield and how students interacted with that and made that come to life.
Yeah, so we, and it's actually, we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary of the release of this app. So we created an app, augmented reality. And so there's a video augmented reality and an audio component to it. And so if you're on, Android, Apple Store, Google Play, whatever, you can search Through Their Eyes. And it's a free downloadable app. And you have two products. You have two ways that you can learn and interact with the Battle of Cool Spring. And one of the things that I always emphasize as a historian with my students is something that my graduate mentor at Tech, Bud Robertson, emphasized. And that was, it's really important to kind of drill down and look at the Civil War and its consequences and its legacies, through the eyes of the everyday ordinary combatant, the enlisted man, the rank and file. And so my students and I researched primary accounts, Union and Confederate soldiers, and we created, based on those primary accounts, these little vignettes. And so if you download the app, you basically scan any flat surface and a map comes up. And it's almost like, if you've been to the Cedar Creek National Park Visitor Center and you go in there and they have this, large tabletop map that lights up.
Right.
Well, basically we've created that, but in the app. So you could have that experience anywhere you're at in the world. And then there are these flags that are positioned and they're specific to a regiment. So if you're interested in the 116th Ohio, you click on that flag and that takes you into a moment in that spot on the field in a 360 video experience. And so, my students helped in the research of the accounts, researching the backgrounds of these soldiers, what happened to them, after the Battle of Cool Spring. And we even had some of the students, when we did the filming out at the property several years ago, played certain roles for us. So that's part of the app you can do anywhere. And then we have an augmented audio component to it that's GPS enabled that you can only do on site. So if you come out to our Cool Spring Battlefield property in Clark County, we have a 9-stop walking tour. It's about almost 2 miles worth of trails. And as you're going along, if you have the app on, when you get within about 10 feet of a GPS ping, there'll be a voice that comes on that, again, takes you kind of into a moment. You hear the account of the soldier, and then you get some biographical information as well. So we really stress those individual stories and, what was the battle's long-term effect and consequence, not only on the soldier, but their families. I mean, these guys, even if they survived, are dealing with a lot of the trauma, whether it's psychological trauma, physical trauma, pretty much until they're in the grave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How long did that project take, Jonathan, from start to finish?
So that was a project that took us from filming to completion about 2 years.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad turnaround. I was thinking it would have been longer, especially since we're kind of new to this format in our field.
Yeah. And we're fortunate at Shenandoah. We have a great, it's a relatively new program. It's called the Shenandoah Center for Immersive Learning. And so we actually offer degrees and certificates in AR and VR. And so we're able to use a lot of students there as well to kind of help create and maintain the product.
Wow, that's awesome. So history students could get a certificate in that, because I think that's the future of what we're going through.
Yeah, we actually you can get a traditional degree in AR, VR, but we also offer a history VR, history AR certificate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's unique. I don't know if I've heard of that, at least in this general area of the world, of the States. That's really cool. That's really cool. How do the students interact with the McCormick Center in other ways? How do they become one with the McCormick Center and get either the certificate program, or how do they understand the Civil War in new ways when they come to McCormick?
Well, I mean, so the traditional way is through the certificate. So the certificate program, it's a 12 credit program, and it includes traditional classes in Civil War and Reconstruction, Civil War and Memory, and then interpreting Civil War sites. And so there's that. But then one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is kind of creating opportunities for our students. And so whether it's working with me on this in terms of transcribing letters and researching soldiers, we have students who are also involved in other projects to help us interpret things that really need, quite frankly, interpreting. So I know you follow me on Twitter and I follow you, and you probably saw that on Monday, a group of students and we presented as part of the Douglas Day celebration at Shenandoah, which of course is a national day of celebration, Douglas Day. we presented some of our findings about the lives of enslaved people out at Judge Parker's retreat. So university, we own 195 acres of what was once part of an 1,100-acre plantation owned by Judge Parker. So Judge Parker, of course, as you know, and many of the viewers know, was the judge who presided over John Brown's trial. And so when the university, brought me on, task one was interpreting the battle. And of course, we know a little bit of the history of enslavement at the property, but we were very fortunate last year to receive a donation from one of the members of the university's board of trustees. Her name is Diane Kearns. She's a great friend. She's known me since my undergrad days at SU. Mm-hmm. And she said, I'd like to give you money to go out there and help your students and you research this. So we were, digging in all kind of census records, deeds, and wills. There's a huge chunk of Judge Parker's papers out at the Chicago History Museum. And we were able to piece together some pretty interesting insight into the lives of enslaved people, how they resisted their enslavement. And really, as well as I do, sometimes when you're doing research, you're looking for things and you just stumble into something that you didn't anticipate.
Right.
And so we actually think that the retreat might have been a stop on the Underground Railroad. So in 1854, September of 1854, we came across a story of 6 enslaved men, 3 enslaved by a fellow with the last name of LaRue, 3 others by Alfred Castleman. And the story goes, based on all of these different accounts, is that they came to Judge Parker's retreat, went to an enslaved person's cabin, asked for some help and some chickens, and then stole a boat. And they took that boat into the Shenandoah River, which of course the river lines the Cool Spring battlefield. It cuts right through the middle of it. And they got to this part of the river that's very difficult to navigate, known as Parker's Hole. So the Shenandoah, usually like normal weather, it might be, 4 to 8 feet deep, but pretty navigable. Parker's Hole is like 30, 40 feet deep. And there's all these weird swirls and stuff. And it turns out the boat overturned these 6 enslaved people. They drowned. And I remember when, we uncovered this story, I'm like, why, of all the places, of all the houses that line the river there, why did they come here? Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out a week ago I was having a discussion with someone, and he said, have you ever heard this oral tradition about this large hollowed out sycamore tree on the property that enslaved people who were trying to self-emancipate hid in? And I said, no. And we started talking about it. And it turns out there is a very large, vast sycamore tree on our property that was once hollowed out, now filled with bricks. And so we're going to obviously do some investigations and try to figure out if we can in any way shed some more light on this. So, this is obviously a pretty exciting thing for my students, because it's not just, learning about history. It's about uncovering and resurrecting these things that have been forgotten. And it's exciting to see them have that opportunity.
Right.
We don't know how this thing is going to end. Maybe it is a dead end, but for right now, we're pretty excited about the prospects of that.
That's really great, because it gets people away from just the idea that you're a detective only in the archive.
Right.
Detective at our on sites too, and historical locations and such. And you don't have to be an archaeologist to be a detective at a historical site. Stuff like that you don't have to dig for that. Right. It's there. Right. And you can find out in different ways. For those who are going to be coming to the seminar, which we're going to go over here, the spring conference, they're going to be able to see Shenandoah University, maybe for the first time. They're going to be on campus seeing things there. What's it going to be like for people who come to the spring conference for their experience? Who are they going to hear from? We can go down the list of speakers. Sure. and the day that you're going to have, which I think is fantastic, because as I have told my followers, it's not often you get to go to a conference that is, doesn't hit your wallet too hard. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, this is a tank of gas for a lot of people. And I'm used to seeing conferences go for $600-700, and this is great because this is accessible, and I love the accessibility of this day. So could you go over maybe the history of why the conference has been taking place, and then going into 22, what would you like to do with it?
Yeah, sure. So let me just say something about, the pricing here. And, I've always been of the mindset that history needs to be accessible to people. And whether it is through, doing it through digital platforms or through breaking down the barriers of finances. And I'm with you. I mean, there's those kind of mega $600, $700, $800 conferences. Not a lot of people anymore can afford to go to those things, and I don't want that ever to be a barrier for people. So, we have started the spring conferences actually back in 2014. So 2014 was my first year as visiting professor at SU when I was still teaching at Lord Fairfax, and so we did them. And there was such a great response. And we had never done the Institute, even going back to my undergrad days, kind of a traditional sit down all day in a lecture hall kind of conference. It was usually just, tours. And there was such a great response. We actually had them out at Cool Spring. And then the attendance came, it got to a point where we couldn't fit people comfortably in the building out there. And so we brought it to main campus. And we've really been fortunate over the years to bring in some top-notch historians to look at a variety of topics. And I think this year, again, we kind of have what I'm considering an all-star cast of historians who bring diverse perspectives. So we're bringing in Lauren Thompson, who teaches at McCormick University. And Lauren was on the broadcast we did about soldier life in the winter and all that kind of stuff. And, she wrote a fascinating book. It's very well written, very well researched, Friendly Enemies. And it's basically about, a soldier fraternization, Union and Confederate soldier fraternization. And so she'll be speaking about that. Catherine Shively from Virginia Commonwealth University will be speaking about the environmental impact on Civil War soldiers. And so, the whole theme of the conference is encounters during the Civil War. So whether you're encountering your enemy, whether you're encountering the environment, my session is going to focus on encounters of Union soldiers with enslaved people in the Valley, and how those encounters basically started to change their mentality about emancipation and its necessity. Because, I think if you kind of look at the scholarship, when a lot of these soldiers enlist in 1861, there's not a huge groundswell of support for emancipation,
right? Because
they have never encountered enslaved people before. But when you're coming to the Valley and you're encountering these human beings and you're seeing their terrible living conditions and how they're treated, it has a transformative effect. And then we're also going to be joined by Jonathan White from Christopher Newport University. He had a book come out. I think the official release was Tuesday this week, A House Built by Slaves. And it's a book about interactions between African Americans and President Lincoln. And so he's going to be speaking about that. But one of the other things that we always try to do at our conferences is to showcase our students. And so it's not just about bringing in, historians from the outside. It's about giving our students a platform to share some of the cool things that they've done. And so, we always have all kind of projects going on at the same time. So it's never just one thing. One of the projects we've been working on now for a little over 2 years is the 1890 Veteran Census Project, specific to the Valley. And so one of my interests has always been Unionists in the Valley. And so in looking at those census records, I was very curious, because there are about 400 and some Union veterans living in the Shenandoah Valley in 1890. And I thought, as I looked at all these names, how many of them were from the Valley? And so students have been working with me during various summers, researching the backgrounds of these individuals. And so far what we found, from year to year, kind of the statistical data is holding true, that about 35% of these guys were born and bred in the Valley. And so this is kind of helping us shed a little bit more light on the strength of unionism in the Shenandoah. So we have some students who are going to be on site that day sharing some of their findings from this project. And again, it's an incomplete project. We're several years out from completing it. But ultimately, this is going to give 5 of our students an opportunity to get their feet wet, so to speak. Not just doing work like they've been doing in the archives and in census records, but also giving them an opportunity to share with others what they've learned and seek the advice of others who are attending the conference as well.
Just out of curiosity, are these men who went to neighboring areas of the state to enlist, like if they went to like Maryland or Western Virginia or something like that to enlist, or did they just kind of hang low until the federal army was nearby and then kind of?
So yeah, it's interesting. Some of them did just that. They went to Maryland and enlisted. Some of them enlisted in what became eventually West Virginia infantry or cavalry units. There are a few guys who actually left the valley at the outset of the war, went to Ohio, enlisted, and then did their service and came back. There's even a few individuals we found who didn't officially muster into a regiment, but were listed in the census as serving as scouts. And it's pretty specific, served as a scout for Robert Milroy, served as a scout for Nathaniel P. Banks. So there's some pretty interesting finds that we've uncovered there.
That's really neat. A lot of people forget about that history of Civil War veterans.
Yes.
And their experiences. We cut everything off in like 1865. It's like, okay, that period's done. Not thinking about the GAR men and the former Confederates and also their thoughts on things. I'm really the older I get, the more I'm into that. So I think it's because I've had so much tactics pounded in my head over so many years. It's like I want to hear something different. And the seminars that you're going to have here that day really appealed to me too, because it's not that traditional thing we heard from our dads or our grandfathers about tactics at a battle. This is about the human experience and the cultural implications of those experiences.
Yeah. And as I said, I mean, that kind of has been, ever since I came to SU, that has been our kind of guiding light, if you will, to really tell those personal stories and help people understand. Because, I think as well as I do that people connect more with those stories than they do. I mean, I've led tours and you've led tours, and when you start to get maybe a little bit too nitty gritty, unless it's a strictly military group, people's eyes will gloss over when you start talking about all these different maneuvers. But when you tell people about human beings with whom they can identify, that packs a pretty powerful punch.
Yeah, because we're all quote normal human beings, and so these weren't professional soldiers, and it was that's what we got to keep in mind too. When is registration open now, and when will it close for the seminar? It's on April 2nd as well.
Yes, So the conference is Saturday, April 2nd. Registration is open, so you can register in one of two ways. So the website is su.edu/MCWI. And it's pretty easy to find at the top tab our spring conference. And so you can register online, or we have you can click and download a PDF file, a PDF form that you can fill out and then mail it into the university with a check or a credit card. So we'll keep registration open until about March the 25th, or until the conference is full. And so I will tell you now that we have probably less than 15 spots available.
Wow.
So I don't know if people are just excited about the topics or excited to come out to an in-person event. But whatever they get. So we have, about 15 slots that are open. And then once it's filled, we'll then, keep a wait list, because stuff happens and, people drop off and those types of things. So even if you aren't able to get a spot, it doesn't hurt to put your name on a wait list.
And everyone watching, I did put that link into the chat on YouTube and Facebook. I put the su.edu/MCWI. And I also put the larger link in there as well if you want to go directly to the conference site for more information and registration and such like that. So please be aware that I put that into the comments section there. You talked about, Jonathan, you talked about publications, and you've been involved in many different publications, whether you've been the author or the editor of these publications. And the latest one is the one that you just held up and I held up, A Good Cause, Letters from the Ninth New York Heavy Artillery. And I was so glad to see this because I didn't know you had had these letters, and I'll have you go through that story about acquiring the letters themselves. But I love seeing units that don't usually get the press get some press, and heavy artillery is one of them. Usually my listeners will know them from hearing about something like at Spotsylvania, and that's about it. Something in the Overland Campaign, then being pulled out of DC to that, or at Monocacy. And now that's about all we hear in the Eastern Theater about heavy artillery. And I was so glad to see them getting the props they deserve in here. How were these letters acquired, and when was the idea like we got to do something with these?
Yeah, so this was actually maybe one of the highlights of the early part of the pandemic for me. So Al McLeod, who was a descendant of a veteran of the 9th New York Heavy Artillery, sent me an email, early spring of 2020, right after the pandemic hit, and said, I'm going to send you a box, and there's some stuff in there for the Institute, some letters and stuff. And I always like to keep my, expectations tempered.
Right.
And then I open up this box, and I'm like, oh my God. So the box contained 60 letters from soldiers, from 11 different soldiers penned, from the 9th New York Heavy Artillery, all kinds of, regimental returns and quartermaster's receipts and all these sorts of documents. And, as well as I do, that not every Civil War soldier letter is created equal.
Right.
And so as I read through these things, I thought, this is a pretty unique set of letters. If for nothing else, it offers a great glimpse. And I know Steve Fan, who you had on, I think last night, right?
Night before. Yeah,
the night before. So he, I know, was excited about this book as well, because there's a huge chunk of letters written from the defenses of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And so this was a regiment, created in New York, summer of '62. And they spend, almost the first 2 years of their service in the defenses of Washington. And what I find interesting about the letters as I was reading them is that they're talking about, the construction of things like Fort Foote. And they're talking about, revamping other fortifications and the kind of the manual work that they performed in order to make certain that the national capital was protected. But what's also interesting in that grouping of the letters is that these guys also play the role of tourists. And so one of the things that is amazing to me, in the midst of conflict, soldiers are trying to find time to go out and visit an attraction. So for instance, there's one of the soldiers ends up visiting the house in Alexandria where Elmer Ellsworth was killed. And, he had a day off, and he had a pass, and he could go wherever he wanted. And he decided he's going to get to Alexandria, and he's going to visit this house. And I thought, well, this in and of itself kind of shows what a remarkable connection Ellsworth had with people. So there's that type of stuff. And then there are, once the 9th New York is released from the defenses of Washington, then there's a cluster of letters that deal with, they're fighting in the Overland Campaign, being assigned to the Army of the Potomac 6th Corps. And then, of course, they're in action the rest of the war, either, in the areas around Petersburg. Of course, they spend time in the Valley. And then after the Valley Campaign, they end up going back to Petersburg and finishing out the war. But I think the letters are extremely rich in content, not just with, the traditional kind of, troop movements and that stuff, but, really offering insight into how they're dealing with, being away from home, how they're dealing with seeing, the carnage of war for the first time. And, as these guys make their way from DC to Fredericksburg and then to the front lines in the spring of 1864, they're writing about how, they had read about this in newspapers. You might see it in, some of the general hospitals in Washington, but they had never seen the war up close and personal, like in the aftermath of battle. And it was pretty shocking to them. There's also great accounts about interactions between soldiers and civilians in the Shenandoah Valley. But of all of them, my favorite letter, and this is one of them that's written by an unidentified member of the regiment, writes about the Grand Review of the 6th Army Corps. And so, I mean, he's just writing about how pointless this is and offers all kind of thoughts about Andrew Johnson and Grant, and it's pretty entertaining. But, when we got these letters, I decided, again, we could have serialized those letters and put them in a journal or done something like that. But I thought, these 60 letters are so rich in content, and there's such a great story here to tell that, we decided to publish these things. And in the introduction, I basically reflected on Alfred Seeley Rowe, who was the regimental historian, served in the regiment. And in his regimental history, he wrote that this is a book really that isn't going to interest a lot of people. It's going to interest survivors of the regiment, interest their families. And that's, as I was reading these letters, I thought, well, there's some validity to this. If you want to trace the 9th New York Heavy Artillery, you can do that through the regimental and the letters. But this, again, is about the people and how their experiences are emblematic of United States soldiers during the conflict. And there's such rich stuff, thinking about Confederate deserters at Petersburg as the war is winding down. And there's not just accounts, but there's also a sense of empathy that these soldiers have, because they kind of, are putting themselves in the shoes of a Confederate soldier. What would I do in this kind of situation, seeing, Confederate defeat potentially as imminent? So yeah, this is the second book collection of letters that we published. The first was a few years ago, the letters of Robert Bradbury, who was an artillerist in Battery D, 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery. And so that's really our mission and our goal. So we don't, go out and spend tens of thousands of dollars on letter collections. We, look to the kindness and grace of people who are looking for a good home for these letters. But, once they arrive at the Institute, once they're cataloged and transcribed with our student help, then we get down to the serious work of making them available to people.
Mm-hmm. I thought that when you brought up Petersburg and when I read the book and hearing through their words how they're seeing, squads of Confederates who are just done, and they're like, we're checking out, we're giving up, and they know that the war's basically lost, and they haven't had food in days and all stuff. And you hear the empathy, like you said, in the U.S. Army soldiers' voices and through their words.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me think about the idea that you can have empathy for what they're going through, because maybe your time as a soldier is also tough, and theirs seems to be tougher, and also it's crumbling and all sorts of stuff. We have to also think of it as, you can be empathetic, but that doesn't mean you're sympathetic to what their cause was.
Right.
And I think far too often when people, especially in the modern era, when you show a little empathy towards the human experience, whether it's on one side or the other, people automatically think that they're showing sympathy for the causation of what it is, and when it actually that can't be, because they're not fighting for that cause, And I think that's a really interesting way to underscore it for students as well as adults, is reading something like that and saying that, yeah, they don't agree with anything that the other side's fighting for, but they have empathy for the people going through that human experience, and almost like a kinship, like you see after the war, where they're like, wow, we survived Petersburg too, and you were against us. And it's a really great thing to see these kind of primary sources coming out in a new way and in the modern era. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
What was something that you're looking forward to with students in the next year of work? Because the pandemic has really thrown a twist on a lot of us in different ways, and it's thrown a twist on education. You're doing a lot of things like this now. You were. What are you looking forward to as projects
Mhm.
for the future with some of these students, because I know that you have some ideas that you're really willing to throw out there.
Yeah, so there's a few things that we have in the works that will be done, with a great deal of student help. So one of them is a project that's funded through the Council for Independent Colleges. So in January of last year, January 2021, we were named, the Institute was named an affiliate partner in the Legacies of Slavery project. So this is a project that has a number of CIC institutions throughout the country, and it's done in partnership with David Blight at Yale and his Center for the Study of Abolition, Slavery, Resistance. And I know I'm leaving out some
Yeah.
of the title there.
Yeah.
But basically, when we applied for the grant, we wanted to look at issues of historical memory and commemoration, and how African Americans in the Shenandoah Valley celebrated emancipation, how they tried to build up the emancipationist legacy and push back against the lost cause. And we wanted to, create basically this online platform where we'll assemble documents that discuss, Emancipation Day celebrations in the Valley, and also look at things like how, for instance, events at Harper's Ferry and around John Brown's Fort and speeches that were made there are aimed at pushing back against the lost cause perspective of things. So I've had students working with me over the past year identifying newspaper articles. And this is something, I obviously became interested in because of my work, about slavery in the Valley for the book that came out last spring from University Press of Florida. But I felt there was a much richer story there. And so we've assembled, I think so far, a pretty substantial library of primary sources that are centered around emancipationist legacy in the Valley, running from kind of the earliest emancipation commemoration we found in 1868 all the way through the early part of the 1900s. And it's all over the Valley, from Harper's Ferry all the way down to Harrisonburg and Lexington, Virginia. And so students are going to be working with me over the next 2 years to add to this library of documents, to contextualize it, to come up with really cool ways to engage people who have never been to the Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, they want to know, if they want to know what Island Park was like at Harper's Ferry, where there was a huge emancipation gathering in the 1890s, we can have these vignettes, and whether it's a video vignette, VR vignette, we'll do things of that nature. So that's one thing that we're going to be doing. And then the other thing that we have in the works, and this is tied to our work at Cool Spring, is we want to create, with the help of our Center for Immersive Learning, a virtual reality experience centered around the life of one enslaved person. And his name was Preston Dunwood. So Preston Dunwood was born a slave in Clark County, Virginia, ended up being enslaved by Judge Parker. He actually was Judge Parker's carriage driver during the time of John Brown's trial.
Wow.
And, one of the challenges of researching and writing and resurrecting the lives of enslaved people is it's difficult to get their authentic voice, because they're not leaving letters and diaries and memoirs like whites are. But Preston Dunwood is unique because he actually published a very short memoir in the early part of the 1900s. And he's a fascinating story. He was at the outset of the war impressed into the Confederacy service. In the spring of 1862, during Jackson's Valley campaign, he ran away to the 46th Pennsylvania, worked as their cook at least through the Battle of Antietam. After the war, he moved to Pittsburgh and then ended up moving out to Ohio. Lived well into the early part of the 1900s, and so we have his memoir. And so through our Center for Immersive Learning lab, we are looking. And again, I'm not the tech person here; I'm just the historian.
Right.
But our technical folks have the ability to take a photograph of him, and make it a three-dimensional being that can then be used to narrate his memoir.
Wow.
That you can interact with. So that's a, you know, another project we have in the works. So again, it's always about trying to, you know, highlight the personal experience, but when we can do so in kind of a new and innovative way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we do kids programs at Cool Spring every summer. And this has been for us a really effective way of engaging, you know, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids about history in a way that's very familiar to them. And, you know, to me, the work of a historian is not just talking to 5 people in a room. It's engaging the broader public, and you have to do that, I think, in an intellectually responsible way, but in a way that's engaging. And I think these, you know, AR, VR tools that we use and are playing around with they help us achieve that goal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I've wanted to do, excuse me, with my project for years. And I get a little jealous when I see other like your organization doing it, because it's like, wow, I wish I knew half of how to do this. And it makes me want to put the phone up in front of my face and see this stuff come to life, and put on the VR goggles and see this stuff. And it just fuels me like it would a 10-year-old. And there's going to be thousands of people over time who are going to do that. And it's going to spark that interest in a new way that I think is just fantastic. You know, reaching that audience who's already putting the goggles on.
Yeah.
You know, and instead of keeping it as history is just something you go to class in high school and it's a gen ed requirement. It's making it come to life, right? And you all at Shenandoah are doing amazing stuff with that. You know, it's fantastic. John McFarland has a comment, and I would love to talk with you about this before we wrap in a little bit. John McFarland says your book "Slavery and Freedom in the Shenandoah Valley" is excellent, and it kind of, which is your previous work, and it kind of underscores what we just went over. What was it like to research for that particular book, Jonathan? And some of the lessons from the thesis that you have from that particular work, if someone hasn't heard of it yet.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, John, for that. I appreciate the feedback. This was an enormously difficult book to write, and this is a project that took me, you know, really bits and pieces here and there, probably almost 10 years to do. And there were other things that I was working on during the time, but again, it's trying to capture the authentic voice of enslaved people. And so one of the things that was most striking to me is that there were, you know, a lot of accounts within regimental histories and that type of stuff, interactions with enslaved people that really had never been utilized before. But one of the things that really was, to me, the greatest find, the greatest research find, were a series of what we would classify really today as oral history interviews conducted by soldiers from Nathaniel P. Banks's army in late 61, early part of 1862 at Harper's Ferry. And they're in General Banks's papers at the Library of Congress. And it was amazing to me. You know, you're sitting in an archive and you're supposed to be quiet, right? And then as I'm reading this, I'm like, holy crap, I can't believe what I'm reading, because it's almost akin to William Still's History of the Underground Railroad,
right?
Where he is sitting down and interviewing these freedom seekers. That's what Banks's men are doing. So, you know, we have not only their names and their ages and who their enslavers were and where they're coming from, but we have these accounts of why they left and what type of military intelligence they're able to offer to General Banks. And so, you know, it paints a obviously, needless to say, a very grim picture of slavery in the Valley, but also the amount of information that they're giving to Banks's command about things like the defenses of Winchester. So, I mean, there are a number of enslaved people who fled to Banks who are providing detailed descriptions of Fort Collier, which figures so prominently in the Third Battle of Winchester. And it's just amazing to me, that there's that level of information. But one of the things that really is central to that book is how tenuous freedom is. And that's really one of the points that I wanted to stress throughout the book, is that freedom does not come at one moment for these individuals. It comes at a variety of moments, and then is taken away, and then is gained back, and then is taken away. And, throughout the course of the conflict, there is a sense of, among enslaved people, we don't know who to trust. And so, the book kind of, goes through, Patterson's early presence in the Valley in late spring, early summer of 1861. And enslaved people in Berkeley County, Martinsburg, Harpers Ferry area who are fleeing to Patterson are shocked because Patterson is locking them up in jail, or he's returning them to enslavers because that's what Union military policy calls for at the time. Right. And there's this great tension that exists between, Patterson's subordinate officers like Wilder Dwight, from the 2nd Massachusetts, who's killed at Antietam. He's just sitting back and saying, I cannot believe we're locking up people who are fleeing to us for protection and providing us information. And so, there's this tension of, well, we're going to help freedom seekers make it, or we're going to employ them, or we're going to hide them from Patterson. And that's actually, one of the things that I'm going to be talking about at the conference on April 2nd. But that's this constant thread that runs through, that even after Union victory at the Battle of Cedar Creek, there still is this sense of uneasiness. Like, okay, we think maybe things are secure, but are we secure? I write about an attempted rape that occurred, in the weeks just after the Battle of Cedar Creek by a Union soldier. And so it really kind of highlights there isn't a stable moment during the conflict, and of course after the conflict, for the Shenandoah Valley's African Americans.
And really underscores this idea of what is freedom.
Yes.
And there's so many different ways of looking at it in that book, where Banks has one that's coming from Washington. The officers under his command have another one, especially if they're from Massachusetts or another New England state, where abolitionism kind of ran through the bloodline a little bit deeper. It wasn't rampant, but it ran through the bloodline a little bit deeper than it would from, say, Maryland or Pennsylvania.
Right. And there's also, as I was putting the book together, and then as I, talk about the book with audiences and my students in particular, I tell them, like, there's things that sometimes enslaved people would do that maybe defies our 21st century logic and common sense. So, there are instances of enslaved people who have fled. So one of the stories I write about in there involved an enslaved man named Manuel from Winchester, enslaved by the McDonald family. And, Manuel left in March of 62 when Banks occupied Winchester, and he worked as a teamster. And First Battle of Winchester happens May 25th, 1862. And Manuel, is driving this wagon north of Winchester, and he gets a few miles north of the city, and he stops the wagon, and he's thinking, okay, what's going to happen to my wife and kids I'm leaving behind, who are still enslaved in Winchester? So he makes this decision to abandon his wagon, come back to Winchester, ends up going back to the McDonald household. And it's interesting, McDonald, in her diary, she writes, like, oh, this is evidence that he knew he made a mistake. He loved slavery, all the kind of typical lost cause rhetoric.
Right.
But then you read later on in the diary, you get to September of 1862, and she's like, uh-oh, Manuel and his wife Catherine just stole our carriage, and they're out of here, as Julius White left Winchester. And so one of the other things that I write about in that book is loyalty to self. And so how are these enslaved people trying to put themselves into the best position to be successful, to make it to freedom? And again, you can say you want to be free, but you need the logistical means through which to be free. And easy to say, I want to be free, but you want to put yourself in the best position possible to be successful. And those are threads that, of course, run throughout the entire book. And I will say, if if anybody's interested in that book and you haven't purchased it, University Press of Florida is running a massive discount throughout the month of February. So if you went to University Press of Florida website and typed in the book, if you put in the code BHM21, it takes like $50 off the price.
Oh, wow.
So it's a massive, massive discount. Brings it down to $35.
I'm trying to bring up the UPF website real quick so I can put that in the comments, and then we'll put that code up as well, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So here's a link, everybody, in Facebook and YouTube land for the book Slavery and Freedom in the Shenandoah Valley During the Civil War. And what was the code again, Jonathan?
It's BHM 21, or no, BHM 22. Excuse me.
22. Okay.
BHM 22. Yeah.
Now I'll get you 50 off.
Yes.
Okay. There you go, everybody. I'll put it up on there. And again, this is in Facebook and YouTube in the comment section. There's the code BHM22, $50 off Slavery and Freedom in the Shenandoah Valley During the Civil War from University Press of Florida. Thank you to them for that.
Yeah.
I love to see publishing companies give help out with those of us who want to put more books on our shelves. That's fantastic. I really appreciate those facets that you brought to life in that. And the other thing was, not only did they need the logistics to seek freedom, they needed the opportunity. And
That's right.
And when he goes back to get his family and they're like, oh, this is proof, it's just not the opportunity he was looking for at the time. It was not the right time to go forward. And I thought of that when I was reading through that work, where it's like, okay, it's logistics and opportunity.
Yep.
It's really important for what we would consider, seeking freedom and opportunity with that. So that's awesome. I want to go over one more time with the upcoming spring conference, Jonathan. April 2nd is a Saturday, everybody.
Yep.
And when's the day start, Jonathan? 8:30, I think.
Yeah, 8:30 is check-in, and then the first session after the remarks really starts at 9:15.
And you are provided lunch in the dining hall.
That's correct.
And you're going to get a full day till 4 p.m.
Yep.
So,
yeah, we'll also have Harpers Ferry National Park Bookstore will be on site, selling all of the speakers' books and other relevant titles. So there's an opportunity to have your get books and have authors sign them and do types of fun things. Awesome.
That's fantastic. And again, I want to give a shout out to this new book that you brought out, that you edited, Jonathan, A Good Cause, Letters from the 9th New York Heavy. Like I said, I'm glad to see Heavy Artillery getting their props, because I grew up firing artillery from Civil War reenacting days. And I'm like, any artillery book, I'm going to probably read that one 2 or 3 times, because I love hearing about their work on the guns and such. But people who live in the DC area, especially, are going to like these guys, because like you said, they talk about Fort Foote. Yep. I think they talk about Fort Hunt in there. Yep. And I think visiting the Smithsonian and all kinds of stuff. So you get to see them, like you said, be tourists and be soldiers at the same time. They're still young men who were seeking adventure in different ways. Yeah, that's fantastic. And everybody, please go follow the McCormick Civil War Institute as well on their website. I did put it up there in the chat in both YouTube and Facebook. su.edu/MCWI. And we really appreciate everyone tuning in. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. It really means a lot to me that you had the opportunity to come on here and discuss the conference, because I know people are longing to get back out there as best as they can and stay healthy doing so. But just having that experience of being together again, and this conference is going to give people a great way to do that in less than 2 months.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John, for having me. And, again, you do great yeoman's work for the history field and helping us, kind of get the word out. So I'm appreciative of that. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I can't do it without the people in the chat. So I have to thank them every time. And I again, thank you everybody for tuning in here on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, Twitter. Sometimes I forget where I'm live. It just runs together after a while. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Please be safe. stay healthy, keep reading, and we'll see you on the next live stream, everybody. Thank you so much.